Hello and welcome back to the Masonic Roundtable, a weekly program where Masons from around the world get together to talk about Masonic news and opinions in a friendly and social manner. As a reminder, the thoughts and opinions expressed here are solely the opinions of the participants and do not represent any Grand Lodge statements or positions. Make sure you keep your conversations open for the public and on the level to interact with us. We'd love to see you in the chat alongside the Facebook video or the YouTube video. So hello and good evening to all of you watching live. My name is John Ruark. I'm past master of the Patriot Lodge number 1957 in Fairfax, Virginia. And we have a very full group tonight, so I'm going to hand it off to Jason Richards for his introduction. Hello, Jason.
Hello, John. Jason Richards here, past master of Vacation Lodge number 16 in Clifton, Virginia, member of the Colonial Lodge number 1821 in Washington, D.C.
Thank you very much. Juan Sepulveda, good evening and hello.
It's good to see all of you. Beautiful day here in sunny Kissimmee, Florida. I'm Juan Sepulveda, and I'm the brother behind the Gentleman's Brotherhood. Thank you, brothers.
Thank you. And hello and good evening to Mike the Intern. Hello.
Hi, Mike the Intern here, Hammy. What am I? The Senior Warden and Lodge Education Officer of Lakeshore Lodge number 307 in Madison, Ohio.
What am I
Good evening,
now?
everyone.
I can't even remember how many titles I have now. So, congratulations and welcome. Robert
Thanks.
Johnson, hello, good evening.
Hello and good evening. Robert Johnson, host of the Whence Came You podcast, and past master Waukegan 78 and sitting secretary, Space Novum 1183. Thanks.
Excellent. And we have a special guest tonight. Special guest, our legal analyst. We have the one, the only, Nick Johnson. Good evening. Hello.
Hello. Let me first by saying that none of the opinions I express represent anything that has ever happened ever in my life. Yes, this is Nick Johnson. I'm a past master of Corinthian Lodge number 67 in big time Farmington, Minnesota, and also civil 190 in the Webs. How is it going, everybody?
It's going great. So look at that. We have a very, very big crew to talk about a very important topic tonight. But before we do want to give a shout out to all of you supporting on Patreon. It's been keeping the show going for a while, and we do appreciate it. If you want to chip in a couple bucks, join a little secret Facebook group, have fun with Secret Santa stuff, all that good stuff, head over to patreon.com/the Masonic Roundtable, and we'd love to see you there. So thanks. Tonight's topic, we'll dive right into it. Treason with an exclamation point. What we're going to talk about tonight is maybe inspired by recent events, maybe not, but we will say that when you are learning about Masonic history, one of the things that you're going to uncover very quickly is, we have a lot of founding fathers were Masons. Okay, that's pretty cool. Until you also realize a lot of those founding fathers were treasonous to the crown, right? Wait a minute. So if we are supposed to be just and upright citizens, if we're supposed to be good and peaceful citizens to the country in which we reside, that starts to create a paradox in our mind. So tonight we're going to talk about what does that mean, where does it come from, and really get into really all the aspects of that. And I wanted to at least hand it over to Mike the Intern first, because he, amongst a couple other Masons around the blogosphere / Facebookosphere / I don't know, whatever you're calling it nowadays. Nick Johnson can call it the blogosphere, but even now it's migrated to the whole interweb writ large. Hammy, you had some thoughts about
Now it's by and large migrated to Parlay.
Parlay. Not anymore.
Yeah.
Hammy, tell us about your thoughts. What inspired you to write some commentary on what Masons and treason actually means?
So what got me started was, there's a couple of letters that got put out there. One by the Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Wisconsin, and then another one by the Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of North Carolina, basically condemning the actions of January 6th. and comparing them to calling it sedition and so forth, and and telling Masons that this goes against everything we believe in. Now, they also tied it to a few other things, but basically we're going to go with that it was the sedition and the fact that goes against everything Masonic. Well, then there's a lot of guys who sit back and go, yeah, but Masons were involved in the French Revolution and the Revolutionary War and the Alamo and so forth. So I decided to I sat down, I wrote a blog post for my blog, and it's called the For My Brother Freemasons, and it's the article is anyway. And basically, it goes down to spell out the fact that in 1776, they didn't just react to one little event. And I won't say that, that these people's thoughts and opinions are little or petty. That's not what I mean. But it wasn't one thing that brought them to that moment. It was decades of abuses by what they began to define as a tyrannical government. And that's the one thing. Masonry is very much about not backing tyranny in any way. It's in our degrees. If you pay attention to what's going on in your degrees, you'll see it. But honestly, that is it right there. We do not support tyranny. So therefore, we defend everyone against tyranny. And in fact, and that's where the Revolutionary War came into that, is, they all sat down and began to define it as tyranny. Now, were there Masons on the other side who didn't think it was tyranny? Of course. So, had it gone the other way, yes, it would have been treason. It would have been treason, and they would have been, how did, what's his name put it? Nicolas Cage.
Right.
Benjamin Gates.
Yeah. What was the quote,
Benjamin
Jason?
Gates.
Do you have that, that episode? A toast.
Yeah, I do.
Go ahead.
A toast, yeah, to high treason. That's what these men were committing when they signed the Declaration. Had we lost the war, they would have been hanged, beheaded, drawn and quartered. And my personal favorite, had their entrails cut out and burned. So here's to the men who did what was considered wrong in order to do what they knew was right.
And that sums it up, right? That's really the crux of the matter, and the point of your blog post, Amy, is that when we consider the context, which is very important, about what was going on in the revolutionary period, it did not happen overnight. It did not happen. It was very much premeditated over a long series of writings and lots of conversations and like well thought out plans, not emotional reactions. There was motion behind it. But
yeah, and they spent a lot of time going back and forth with England. Ben Franklin, one of the most zealous founding fathers, when you really come down to it, was not always in favor of independence. He was actually in favor of the king. He thought the king was great, and that the empire we could all be better by being a part of this empire. And it took years of him seeing and actually experiencing firsthand some of those abuses in London for him to go, okay, enough's enough. But he was actually there trying to convince the Parliament that what we were saying wasn't as bad as how we really feel. It seemed like we're doing this here. We dumped the tea. He's like, no. You don't understand. It's not as bad as as that sounds. They'll work with you. Just tail it back. And no, Parliament wouldn't do it. So, yeah.
Yep, and also to kind of put a finer point on it as well, and when I read through your blog post, I thought it was excellent. I thought it was a fantastic blog post, and the way in which I described it to you was, there's two concepts of these kind of insurrection moments, right? There's revolutionaries and there's reactionaries, right? Revolutionaries are quite literally rip and replace, right? They are ripping out an old system that's no longer working. And in this case, oddly enough, where you live right now, where it was the Western Reserve, is one of the main reasons why the revolution occurred, was because the British were taking excessive amounts of money from the colonies because, they viewed us as essentially, planters and things like that would just send all this stuff back essentially at cost. And then nothing, they wouldn't have to protect any of these assets, and the French were constantly fighting against them. And so at some point they went from they weren't really trying to go back to an even older system. They were just tired of this system, and they ripped it out and then replaced it with a republic. So that's what that is. And then you take that and then look at a reactionary type response. And so, anything like the reactionary response in France in the 1840s, 1848. And really, it's a promise of a time that never existed, but everybody kind of sort of seems to remember that, right? And the problem for a reactionary, why they don't last very long, subtract out Franco from that. But the reason they don't last very long is because they promise all these things, and then those things no longer, they can't promise anymore. It finally just goes away, which, looking at that on a revolutionary response like here, right, where there are some revolutions that are fantastically helpful, right, and then there's others that are terrible, right, and so ours would be considered, but it's less about the outcome itself, or it's less about the action that leads to it and more about the outcome itself. And that is where I think, especially when we're looking at this discussion, of where should a Mason place themselves, it's, are your actions attempting to rip out and replace it with something new, or trying to shock the system to make it better? Or are you trying to go back to this place that just you want it to be this place and you've just never been there? And I think that's where, as Masons, we have to frame our minds, on these kind of what we would call treason, or things like that.
Absolutely.
Now, Juan or RJ, wanted you to chime in. Think about, if you do some research on the revolutionary or colonial Freemasonry and how it applies to the Masonic ideals, right? How we've even heard the thought that America is the great Masonic experiment, right? What are your thoughts on the Masonic influence as it relates to Enlightenment and democracy, and how that sparked the revolutionary time frame? Because that's really kind of what we're talking about here. Why were the Masons involved, and why was it influenced by the Masons?
Well, if you look at the established government at the time, you had a monarch, you had a king who had complete power, and if you look at the different acts and levies that he put against the colonies, you can see that they were somewhat ill-informed. In a sense, there was nothing that the decent people in the colonies could say that had any kind of impact on what the king decided. Whereas when you look at the organization of Freemasonry, you have this process in which everybody has a vote. Everybody deserves this respect. When we talk about being on the level, it doesn't matter whether you're a master, whether you're a past master, whether you're just a brand new brother, you still have a voice and a vote. And if you feel that something was unjust, you have the capability of standing up and actually basically, expressing yourself, but actually making a difference with your vote, which is nothing. It's completely the opposite of what was happening at the time. So you have these men who are, like you expressed, they place value not only in their system, but also in the ability to gather knowledge and gather wisdom that can be employed in their government, in their works, in their personal lives. So there's that room for implementing all these things. Now, when it comes to the treason component that we were talking about, one thing we have to remember is that here is an external force who is causing incredible pain and suffering in the colonies, and these men were trying to find ways to alleviate that for themselves and for their families. So if you were to, which I'm sure at one point or another, we're going to try to draw some sort of parallel with whatever was happening here last week, there is a difference. There is a significant difference where we are not, well, the people that are incensed about the outcome of the election, they're not fighting an outside power. They're not fighting some tyrannical leadership across the ocean. What they're fighting is their own people. They're fighting the people that,
representatives.
correctly, the people that we collectively decided should be leading this country. And that, it is important that we draw that distinction. Some people are calling whatever started happening here on January 6th the new revolution. You hear this clown Alex Jones calling for the new 1776, and this is nothing like what was happening in that time.
Right.
So
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, and that's
I digress.
I mean, that's absolutely right, and I think it's a good segue because we've talked about the setup of like the Masonic ideals and how they applied to the revolutionary time period and the act of treason they committed. But as I think Hammy and I were talking about a couple days ago, is the history books are written by the winners, right? So it's not treason
Yeah.
if you won; it's treason if you lost, right? Because you're just replacing, like Nick said, you're just replacing a system, and so you have to keep that in mind. But then let's fast forward a bit, because now let's look at what happened on January 6th, 2021, right? The attack on the Capitol building. This is obviously what we're talking about, and I'm not going to go through the history of this thing, but I do want to bring up a couple points, right? That one thing that it's become emotionally charged, right? So if you hop on any Facebook group of Masons, it's going to be a clear divide of the emotions and rationale behind that. But I want to keep one thing in mind. One thing that's not mentioned very often is that I see a lot, both in the media and with just personal conversation, that if you were there, you were 100% part of it. Part of it being the actual storming of the Capitol and the violence and the attacks. And that is obviously not true, because the petition for the assembly to have the protest was actually applied for an estimated crowd size of 30,000 people. Okay, so want to keep that in mind, that when you have 30,000 people, obviously 30,000 people did not make it onto the Capitol grounds, and 30,000 did not make it into the Capitol. So let's not paint
They kind of overestimated their attendance.
Yes, but that was the request. That's all we have to go on. I tried to pull some numbers, and obviously it's hard. It was more than a couple hundred. Maybe at on a conservative number would be about 10K. Okay, so let's go with that. So we have 10,000 Ms, or 10,000
Based on the data you're making up due to lack of data.
Negative, based off of peer-reviewed reporting mechanisms. But anyway, so gosh, here we go. This it only took 19 minutes before Jason had to say something. No, this is important though, because what I want to make clear is that it's very easy to group people together. It's very easy to put labels on things, and even if you can agree with parts of the need for securing democracy through accurate counting, if you agree for making your voice heard, right? There's a whole variety, a whole spectrum of ways that this could be interpreted, and the good news is most news outlets, most level-headed people say the violence was completely wrong, completely way off. Mm-hmm. But I also want to bring up a second point to that. So we have such a large group that has a variety of interests, right? This was not one group that had one objective to storm the Capitol. Okay, so there's a lot of people that were there for a variety of reasons. The also statistical chances there were Masons there, right? Statistically, right? There's not been any Masons that have been identified in the press for being involved in any of the attack or anything like that. But statistically, you have to admit there were actual Masons there who were trying to address some sort of perceived injustice in this nation. So all that being said, when we discuss how or how not Masons should treat, react, inspire, or disavow the actions that happened, I want to keep it in mind that there are multiple groups that there were some really bad groups there. There were neo-Nazis, there were white supremacists, there were far-right militias, there were the Boogaloo movement. It was a whole selection of people, right? So it seems to be in the reporting that it's all or nothing. That if you agree with the original protest, then you're automatically a white supremacist Nazi, and that is certainly not fair to the conversation.
Well, and just to I'll throw out the legal thing here too as well. So, the interesting thing in the Constitution, so there's really only one offense that's laid out specifically in the Constitution, and it's in Article 3, Section 3, and it is actually the treason section. So it's the one that defines treason. And what it does is, the reason it is defining treason as an act is because during the when Great Britain and King George III and all that, the nature and understanding of treason was expansive, and it was very useful to cast nets out and say, well, this person is why they're giving our enemies comfort because, well, they took they took the boat for a joyride, therefore giving it and so essentially we codified within the Constitution a very specific understanding of treason. Now, the irony there is that the state constitutions, many of them actually have more expansive understandings of treason. So I don't know if some of you are aware, but in the state of which you might be residing in, there may be a treason statute within there. And if you've ever read about Joseph Smith, who was the Mormon prophet, the founder of the Church of Latter-day Saints, he was actually charged twice for treason, first against Missouri and then second against Illinois, because for treason, because he was essentially setting up what was viewed as a competing government within those two states. So, when we're looking at treason, it gets very, from a federal level, it's very focused on specific acts and specific understanding, because there were abuses to it by continental European powers. They would use it essentially as a sword to take out political enemies, and so that's why we dialed it back at the federal level. But that still means that if you live in the state of Minnesota, don't commit treason. It's punishable by life imprisonment. So
good advice.
And have fun looking that up. So there you go. Some of you might be in trouble right now.
Ooh.
And don't forget, Joseph Smith was a Freemason.
He was
a twice convicted
sorta
treasonous Freemason. I don't know.
Yep. I did find, Nick, in Florida they do have a specific treason statute, and in it it goes like this. It says, treason against the state shall consist only in levying war against the same, or in adherence to the enemies thereof, or giving them aid and comfort. Whoever commits treason against the state shall be guilty of a felony of the first degree, punishable as provided in blah, 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 blah. But interestingly enough, giving them aid and comfort.
Can't give him a Band-Aid?
Nope.
They got to. Hey, let me just give you a Band-Aid.
Treason.
Traitor.
Treason band.
Treason.
Traitor.
See, now we have every single listener right now checking their state code, making sure they haven't committed treason today.
Insert
crap.
state. Treason. Oh, son of a gun.
Oh, I shared that meme because I thought it was fun.
So bringing this back to, how Masonry treats treasonous acts, I think it's very interesting because as Robert and others have alluded to, at least in Virginia, and Mike has alluded to this as well, there are several things in Masonry and the Masonic ritual and elsewhere that come down very harshly on treason. We are exhorted to be peaceable citizens and to respect the government of the land in which we live and occupy. I was talking to the guys before the show, and treasonous offenses are actually in some cases accepted from Masonic protections. So it's just a very interesting dichotomy that I've been living in for the past week and a half, where we have Masons who are brought up just saying no treason, no treason, no treason. That's a huge thing that's nailed into our heads during the ritual, and just advocating further acts of violence and things of that nature, especially on social media. It just boggles my mind.
I think what I find most frustrating in a lot of this, in what you're talking about, is what I think is so important. Like, there's been a lot of blog posts about it, and I loved Chris Hodap's blog post. My only issue, right, is that I felt like Chris, and if you're watching this, Chris, just on the level, I wish you had given your opinion on the matter, because I think a lot of people listen to Chris and they look to Chris sometimes for a way to be, right? He's got a lot of weight, and what's notably frustrating, where Mike took it, which was the big thing, was everybody kept equating these things, as we kind of talked about in the beginning, the American Revolution, and how is this different? And Mike laid it out so well, and yet we have brothers who they disagree, and there's a lot of dissonance about it, and they don't want to understand that there's an extreme inequity between the criteria for why these people did what they did and the criteria for why these people did what they did. The questions were asked, well, what if you were a Nazi in Nazi Germany and you were a Freemason and employed by the government and you hid Jews? Are you breaking your Masonic oath because you're not following the government? And it falls into this really bizarre thing where people don't know how to navigate this thought process of almost like triage in moralism or something. No, you wouldn't be breaking your Masonic oath because you're upholding like sanctity of life and doing the right thing. You know what I mean? But somehow there's this wall that nobody seems to be able to look through, and it's really like it's a bummer. It's sad, and I think as we move through this conversation, there's probably brothers listening who are like, I'm just so tired of all this. And what I find frustrating about that is this is the same people who keep saying, stop posting this stuff. No politics, no religion. Most of those dudes are supporters of, or like they advocate for it, or they didn't see anything wrong with it. And they just don't want to see it anymore. It's like when you keep, reminding your significant other not to do that. Don't bite your nails. Don't bite your nails. You leave me alone. It's like nagging. Like, when are you guys going to stop? And I think I didn't write an article this time around because, geez, Chris Hodap did, Kevin Holman, Mike, Chris Hathaway even and put a little something together on Midnight Freemasons. Like, there was just a lot of voices out there, and the vitriol that was coming through
Right.
in a lot of Facebook groups was really interesting.
It's more than just vitriol and hatred. It's just rampant unwillingness or inability to have a rhetorical discussion with someone and actually, meet someone on the level and have an exchange of ideas.
You love the old charges, Jason. You love these old charges. And one of the big things that people keep coming up with, and they say, well, the guys who in the American Revolution, they were guilty of treason and Masons. What makes it different? And so then they ask the question, well, what were their obligations? How do you know? Did they also swear to uphold the government? Did they also swear to do this? And the answer I have to keep giving is, I don't really know, but I'm certain it's not exactly the way we took our obligation and the way you took your obligation.
Exactly.
Right.
If you're gonna, if you think these guys are out there and they're and you're okay with it somehow, basically, now I want to say, okay, so you're cool with removing the rule against felons in Freemasonry. Like, I just see it like, where do you draw that line, man?
Right.
Like, that's what I want to know.
Yeah. Well, and that's
RJ,
the thing is, yeah. Oh, go ahead.
No,
Mark.
go ahead, Nick.
Well, and that's the thing with the Grand Lodge system in general, right? And the thing about it is Hobbes said it best, where he said that authority, not truth, makes the laws, right? So Thomas Hobbes said that, and that's the thing is, when the Grand Lodge system was first starting, before the lodges even existed, there was an actual fear that at some point lodges would no longer exist. I mean, even all the way up to 1799, when they passed, I believe it's called the Unlawful Societies Act, that for whatever reason, disallowed all these other Republican style, pushing for republicanism and removing the monarchy. It made all of those illegal, and for whatever reason carved out a nice big donut hole for Freemasonry. And that's, it's always been kind of interesting, is that the Grand Lodge system has always seeming to be terrified of the idea that ultimately the state is going to impose something on it, and then it points to examples, right? So I mean, in 1914, at least in Minnesota, 1914, but in the 1910s, to quell a lot of these very extremist ideologies, whether it was Marxism, socialism on that side, and this very scary Hegelianism, nationalism on the other side. And so within all of these lodges, they said the standard for this Grand Lodge is the United States flag, full stop. I mean, it was one of those that they were absolutely wanting to show that we are loyal to this country. We will not do anything of any illegal, and unreliable things to this government. We will be quiet citizens. And, it's always been that way with the Grand Lodge. It's always been, we're trying to quell this fear, this, that we're somehow going to be shut down. And it's kind of interesting is that then you have individual Masons, within those Grand Lodges saying, screw you, I can do whatever I want. I'm American, I can do what I want. And it's kind of, it's one of these balances where you have a Grand Lodge, it's like, guys, the governor said that we have to shut down because of COVID. And then you got the other ones who are like, COVID, I could just spit on everybody, right? It's like, guys, just stop. For the love of God.
Why is it so hard for me to breathe?
I know, it's like, just listen to the authorities sometimes. Not every time. Sure, I can be like anti-authority, but it's one of those that sometimes it's like, guys, and I know it's me sounding like I love the man now, right? But
You do.
Becky Lynch, she's fantastic. So she's like,
Oh,
that's a
jeez.
shout out to Paul. But there you go, the man. Much love.
In order for us as Masons to really be able to step up to the opportunities that life presents and do so with confidence, with vigor, with knowledge and wisdom, in order to make the right steps, we need to prepare, right? So just by virtue of being Masons, you're no better than any other person. Now, we have the privilege that we take an obligation. We join a fraternity that is comprised of many men who do love Sophia. They love this acquisition of information, and they hearken back to history and glean lessons from it. And yet, anytime you post anything related to politics and in one of these Masonic groups, for example, we can't mix Masonry and politics. How dare you? Now, here's what I propose. If you really believe that Masons can make a difference in the world, that Masons can make a difference beyond the difference that they make on themselves, you have to be involved in civics. You have to be involved in the crafting and the molding of society. And that only happens if you're able to gather the wisdom and come together with other wise men and make decisions, put action plans together, have some sort of influence. Now, if I'm not saying let's talk about politics in a stated meeting, of course not. But if there's someone you can trust with whatever conflict you have in your mind about what's going on in politics, is your brother. And you can express yourself fully without having any kind of fear that they're going to betray you for just having thoughts and having deep conversations about the possibilities of influencing one thing or another. So I think this situation right now in our republic is a great illustration of the importance of us having deep, meaningful conversations that go beyond just the menu of what's happening in the lodge. It just goes beyond even meaningful things like charities and community involvement. All that is fine and dandy. But if we don't take our privilege of having access to a great network of wise men, if we don't take that privilege seriously and we use it to really bring forth a better future, then we're wasting our time. Especially if we, what are we going to do? There were Masons in DC for one reason or another. Sure, they were there. Now, there's plenty of people that support what happened within the Capitol. And I'm talking about there's plenty of Masons who support what happened inside of the Capitol. Okay, so we can't deny that.
To be
that's
clear,
the truth.
we're talking about the violent storming of the Capitol.
Of course.
Mm-hmm.
And
just so people couldn't get that.
I think we could have better influence in the brothers that we have access to by, instead of shying away from the difficult conversations, to embrace them in a respectful manner that really, puts action behind our words when we claim that the liberal arts and sciences are important to Freemasonry.
And just a shout, yeah. Well, and just a shout out to the Dreyfus Civics Initiative. So, Brother Richard Dreyfus actually has a 501c3 that seeks to push civics and civic mindedness back into the citizenry. And it's one of those that I earned Eagle, many years ago, but the same principles still exist, where I still have a giant flag in front of my yard, so in front of my house. And it's one of those that I do. I think being civic minded, being able to listen to others, and that's what we've run into, is that with this essentially, and I won't use the term treasonous, because frankly it's a loaded word and a statutory concept. But this very violent assault upon the U.S. Capitol, it's the literal seat of the government, and I do feel like at some point we don't have the way to speak to each other in a way that forwards understanding. And I'm not applauding those who went in fact, the complete opposite. And what I think needs to happen is, maybe, and this is a vain hope, but that we could find some way, not necessarily to find middle ground, but find a platform by which we can speak to each other. See, and that's the amazing thing about Freemasonry, is that the things that divide us are politics and religion, right? And so we're expected to drop those things outside the door. We don't. I mean, you can't. It's impossible, right? I mean, you carry those, but you're hiding them behind your apron, I guess. But it's one of those that the one thing that Freemasonry can provide in this space is essentially to force people that would not be around each other to actually interact. And that's something that when you're forced to have to deal with the other person, it's it's a lot harder to be cruel in person than it is to be online. I mean, that's just natural. Right. And so, that's what really we would need to do at this point with Freemasonry is, and I think making statements is one way to start doing that.
So I think, that's a really good segue to the next point I wanted to bring up, which is I think I saw you and Robert share this petition going around. And so Robert, tell me a little bit about what this is, what it stands for, because it really helps to solidify the perceived ambiguity we've been talking about, where let's just lay it all out there and say this is not cool, and I'm putting my name next to this to say that Freemasons shall not countenance sedition. Say more.
Yeah, well, this came about. I did not create this, but I know the man who did. He is my current worshipful. And we saw the initial posts from the Grand Master of North Carolina. Somebody posted them on our Grand Lodge Facebook page. And it spawned 208 comments or something in 40 minutes, some goofy stuff, right? Just a lot of vitriol. Take this down as political. Well, I mean, you're discussing a crime that happened on the grounds of the Capitol. So, I mean, it happened in a political space, but it's actually just talking about crime. But anyway, then we posted the thing that came from Wisconsin, actually, because Spencer is the grand rep to the state of Wisconsin. So he posted that in the Illinois Facebook group. And that also was deleted. This petition has stayed live on our Grand Lodge Facebook page for 24 hours. I am astounded. Wow. Somebody recently said something along the lines that this particular petition was disgusting, and it advocates to those who, if they don't sign it, it's a witch hunt. And no, actually, signing this petition is essentially just a way to come together as Freemasons who would publicly state and wished their Grand Lodge came out with a statement to denounce these kinds of things. And so one of the things that really grinds my gears, to coin a Family Guy quote from many years ago, is that they said, the fact that you have put this out here like takes away from a Mason's obligation, because it's assumed already that we don't stand with this. But if that's so, then why do we have people debating whether or not it's okay to even say something, right? There's a difference between discussing criminal acts on the government, what's happening in America. I mean, that's not generally politics. This is back to civics. So we have a big disparity in understanding there. And so, yeah, we've been sending this around, hoping more guys would sign it. I think having anybody sign it was cool. I signed it, probably within the first 15 minutes of it being up, because it's my worshipful. It's not like we sent this around to our lodge members. It's just we just posted it. It was taken off of Reddit pretty fast, which was interesting. There's been much more divisive topics, I'm sure. But
It's been reported on the Winding Stairs no fewer than like 6 or 8 times.
Wow.
Yeah.
For some reason, it keeps ending up back on the page.
Yeah.
The two things that frustrate me the most, I think, about this is that people don't like it when we keep talking about it for whatever reason, right? It makes them uncomfortable. They don't like politics and religion, even though this is, I don't consider this politics.
Or they agree with it and they don't want to come out and say it. So they just hope it goes away.
There's kind of a fear there for sure. But somebody, and I know I'm not the only one who shares the disdain for this, but before I say this one thing, and I want to pass it to Jason specifically, is that everybody has a camp, right? People go to church to be in a camp. People join a political party to be in a camp. People join
tribes,
even if they believe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like people love tribes, right? And we see people who join Freemasonry who don't particularly embody the tenets that we espouse to have, that we say out loud that we have. And I'm just flabbergasted, I think, mostly due to, I was kind of a jerk on a couple posts where somebody said, I'm not signing this, my obligation says everything. I said, so it's safe to assume, my brother, I can say that you do agree with this thing, you just don't want to sign it. And they didn't really reply to it, right? It's just kind of weird. As everybody has said, Freemasonry really does all this stuff. They equated this thing to somehow cancel culture. And I said something, stupid like, cancel culture is, alive and well in Freemasonry. You post something and you don't want to talk about it and it gets deleted. Here's your cancel culture. But the thing that just drives me nuts is this thing that people constantly employ, is they say, a bunch of virtue signaling. Look, all I'm going to say is this one thing, and I know Jason can talk about this better than me, is that in my mind, virtue signaling isn't like a real thing. And because you can publicly state that you support something, and that's natural to do. To even say that a thing is virtue signaling, it's like I could just turn that right back around and say, okay, well, if you stand for the national anthem, you're virtue signaling. If you say the Pledge of Allegiance, you're virtue signaling. Like, it's like a derogatory term. It's somehow supposed to hurt somebody's feelings, but in actuality, it's not even a thing. Like, when did it become wrong to say, I'm okay with this moral thing that I think is correct? I don't know.
And that in and of itself, Robert, is not wrong, and that's not actually the dark piece that hides behind someone calling someone else out as virtue signaling. The fact of the matter is, virtue signaling, there's even some debate over whether or not the person who says they invented the term actually invented the term. Virtue signaling was conceived either way as a way to call somebody out for being disingenuous and trying to align themselves publicly with a group without actually putting any effort behind it or even believing what that group or in that particular cause. And I give the example like this, someone who is virtue signaling is someone who will post "meat is murder" and then follow it up with, "Oh my goodness, I absolutely adore my new leather cowboy boots." So when you call someone out as virtue signaling, you are saying, hey, whatever you're posting there, you don't actually believe it. You're just trying to get attention. And there is a serious problem with that, especially when it comes to the condemnation of white supremacy and other kinds of discrimination and seditious activities. Because if you are saying that someone else is virtue signaling, it's almost a mirror imaging type of fallacy where you're like, well, I don't think that that's true. How could anybody think that that's true? So you telling me that you think that's true when I know you don't think that's true, that's virtue signaling. And it becomes a logical fallacy in and of itself, because in order to really be able to use that term appropriately, you have to be able to have some sort of proof that that person who is standing up for that cause, whatever it may be, doesn't actually believe in that cause.
Right.
And that's very, very difficult to prove. The other problem is it gets to more along the lines of like whataboutism, which is essentially a fallacy where you misdirect the criticism without actually attacking the argument itself. So if you say someone is virtue signaling, it is essentially an ad hominem attack against that person to say you're being disingenuous, you don't actually believe that, and it's a way to discredit someone's argument or attempt to discredit someone's argument without actually addressing the argument itself. And it's bullshit.
So, I think I'm glad you kind of clarify that, because I think it's, the more I think about the term virtue signaling, everybody virtue signals, right? Every single person virtue signals, whether it's what they put on their shelf for people to see, whether it's the flag they put, whether it's the bumper sticker they put on their car, whether it's how they dress, how they appear, right? That you are trying to signal that I stand for certain things, certain values, certain tribes, certain teams, right? Yeah. So, so it's funny, and just talking before the green room, I said, if you're a Freemason listening to this, and you wear a Masonic ring, you wear a Masonic shirt, yes, you're virtue signaling that you're a Freemason, right? So, it's not inherently bad, but it is when you're inconsistent and when you're trying to say or do things that you are not. So.
That's not technically aligned to the definition.
Right. Mm-hmm.
If you were a non-Mason wearing a Masonic ring, you would truly be virtue signaling.
I disagree.
Attempting.
But there you go, because you are signaling that you are standing for certain virtues.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're wrong, but move on.
Well, I'm sorry that you were incorrect. No. Okay, and I swear to you that this expression sounds to me like something that people came together and did one of those behind the mirror kind of studies to see what kind of words other people got triggered by in order to derail conversations. If you ever did something that you're embarrassed about, if there's a quality of you that you wish you improved, if there is some faults and some flaws in your life, and yet you try to convince the people upon whom you have influence to do better than you, Are you virtue signaling? No, damn it. You're just trying to help people. You're inspiring people. You're trying to convey the importance of things being followed. Whether I'm inconsistent with time management or not doesn't matter when it comes to me trying to tell you that you should pay attention to your 24-inch gauge. It doesn't matter if I am consistent with my eating habits or not, and I'm trying to tell you that it is important for you to
Right.
stop eating so much stupid stuff.
Right.
Right?
Doesn't mean
Yes.
it's wrong. Yeah, it just means it's inconsistent with your own behavior.
So
I
anybody,
mean, just because I have to file bankruptcy doesn't mean it's a bad thing for me to go out there and tell somebody you should, operate within your budget.
Right. Pay off your credit cards. Yeah, exactly.
exactly. So it's almost it's a useless expression. It really is. It's just telling people, I don't want you to tell me what to do because you're not consistent with what you do. Listen, dumbass. If we're not monetizing this one,
So much for our
You know-
G-rated. Yeah, exactly.
yeah. Listen to me carefully.
I
If
already
you're
broke the seal.
listening, listen to me carefully, okay? If you are using this expression more than once a year, okay, please stop it, because it makes you look foolish to the people that know better. All right? If you ever picked up if you use this expression and you ever picked up a self-help book, you're a hypocrite. Think about it, because now you're putting all your trust in an individual for whom you have no idea whether he's consistent or not in what he does, and he's telling you how to do things better. So he's virtue signaling you. All right, enough about that. Just don't use it
Wow.
around me if you want me to respect you. That's
Man,
it.
this got to the juicy part right as we were getting ready to go to the final question part of the show. So
Give me a beer.
yes, salute. Let's talk about this. Final question for tonight is: should Freemasons condone seditious activity? Yes or no? And that is a loaded question because there's obviously times where it's appropriate. But I'm going to hand it off to Robert for his answer to the final question. Should Freemasons condone seditious activity?
That's totally a loaded question. I was talking with a brother this afternoon.
This
who's
is being
on the
recorded.
I know. I was talking with a brother this afternoon who actually asked me the question. He said, and I quote, I'm just going to read the question to you. I'm pulling it up here. He says, you personally, what would it take to join a movement against the government? And I had to really think about that, right? I took an obligation to uphold the Constitution of the United States. I say the Pledge of Allegiance. I am proud of America. I fly the flag 365 days a year. Rain, wind, sleet, snow, sunshine, doesn't matter. My wife says, take it down at Christmas time. It competes with the Christmas lights. And I say, damn it, it's America all year long. And so it is really a difficult question. I said, I really have no idea. And it really has to come down to, is there a mass movement that is subverting human rights? Is there an armed coup of the government that is not going to leave the office? And is there now the democratically elected person? I'm not talking about America. We're talking about a hypothetical situation where people would have to arm themselves to take out somebody who attempted to stay in power, like we hear about in all of these countries all over the world. If that's the case, then Freemasonry can condone or can commit treason. The same reason we committed treason, in the American Revolution, we had legitimate grievances. We had issues to move through, to fix. Human rights were being violated. We had we're being taxed, we're treated less than human. I mean, even the British soldiers that were stationed on what would become America's soil were treated less, even though they were the same ranks. This is just crazy. And so when I think about that kind of sedition, treason, whatever, I think is absolutely not just for Freemasonry, but anybody. Because Freemasonry doesn't like supersede, the value of human life and doing what's right.
Right.
I mean, there may be a law in Freemasonry. There are laws in Freemasonry right now that are so backwards. Like, I know brothers all the time that just disregard them because they're antiquated, and we just haven't gotten rid of those things. They're like old dumb laws. And so acts that could potentially happen that Freemasons abstain from or abstain from advocating or condoning them, in my opinion, would be the acts that happened just very recently on the Capitol building. Why? Because there's no legitimate claim to a grievance. You don't like what happened, even though you have representation. Your representation was actively having their rebuttal as they were doing their lawful duty with the electoral vote, and yet this happens. And so, in my opinion, you cannot be a Freemason. I'm sorry, you can. But I will say that you shouldn't, that it's incompatible. If you truly believe in the tenets of our institution, it would be incompatible if you did condone those actions now. That's a really long answer. Sorry.
No, detailed, but I appreciate it because it was a loaded question, and so I think you did a good job of laying that off. Again, we'll chop it up and make you say the opposite thing for a nice snippet later. So thank you for that. All right, Jason Richards. The question is, final question: should Freemasons condone seditious activity? Yes or no?
So it's not a question that you can answer universally or unilaterally, but that notwithstanding, I think it goes against everything we stand for 99 times out of 100 for a Freemason to condone a violent, seditious activity. You get into the finer nuances of massive human rights violations, backed by real evidence and you know state-run terror and things of that nature. But to be honest, in those countries and regimes that conduct those activities and have those human rights violations, Freemasonry is more or less outlawed anyway. You saw that with Nazi Germany, where Freemasons were highly persecuted. So I don't have a good answer except to say you have to be very, very careful about what you actually sign up for as a Freemason, because we are supposed to hold ourselves to a much higher standard. And being a peaceable citizen and a good man is a core part of who we are as Masons. So I will say that I fully believe that what happened a week ago at the Capitol is completely and utterly incompatible with Masonic membership, as is a lot of the things that underpinned a lot of the radicals who showed up, which is white supremacy and bigotry. I will universally condemn white supremacy, and Freemasons who share those views shouldn't be in this organization.
Yeah, I'm going to start an petition as well that says that. So yes, I'll get you to sign that first. But no, I make light of it, but you're absolutely right. That is something that is really incompatible with Freemasonry. So so good answer. I appreciate that. I'm going to hand it off to Juan. Should Freemasons condone seditious activity, yes or no?
Okay, obviously it's a very charged question, but first, if we go to really be clear on what sedition is, and it's the conduct or speech inciting people to rebel against the authority of a state or a monarch. If you have a state or a leader who is blatantly creating some human right violations, for example, where it is clear that it's there's a line between good and evil, then an individual can perhaps decide to do that. Now, he may happen to be a Freemason. I can't say that Freemasonry should stand for something or should condone something. This seems to be more of an individual decision. And, just to be clear, I applaud what, Jason was talking about. It is, you listen to some of the footage of the people that went to the Capitol with intentions of causing harm. And today, even I heard some men talking about that the only way to deal with the Capitol Police was to kill them. That was what they were expressing. They even said, next time we won't come with the Bible, we'll come with weapons. And that doesn't sound to me like someone who is looking for the best for their country. For the past few years, especially towards the in the last quarter of 2020, our country was manipulated by lies and by mistruths, and a lot of people, for no fault of their own, were at the mercy of those lies. And many of them see violence as the ultimate alternative. And I think that people that are responsible for inciting that should be held accountable. I pray that this new year is one that brings more understanding, that it brings more civility to our government and our political arena, because we need dignity in our leadership. There has to be morality, there has to be virtue, there has to be leaders who lead by positive example, who virtue signal as hard as they can for their constituents to follow. But in all seriousness, this is a difficult question, but I really hope that individuals don't take this lightly. If your candidate lost, I don't think that is a reason for you to take arms against the people that were duly elected by your fellow men. I don't think that's a reason for it. I pray that this country moves in a right direction, and that we have the strength to lead it adequately. So thank you, brothers, for listening and for watching. If you found any value in this episode, make sure you put it in front of other people who may need to hear it.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you, Juan. Let's cut over to Hammy. Should Freemasons condone seditious activity, yes or no?
So, the funny part is I think I can make this a lot easier than everybody else has. Seditious acts? No, absolutely not. And I'll say why on that. Because seditious acts are really basically a criminal act. If you're talking about, what I started this whole thing off as, if you're talking about the treason for a good cause, that's a whole different thing. But a seditious act itself is a crime. Even when you look back on the Boston Tea Party, we can't condone the Boston Tea Party. We really can't, because it was a criminal act. But in comparison, because some people have said, this violent act, blah, 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 how does it not compare to the Boston Tea Party? Well, the Boston Tea Party was actually done very peaceably. They actually just went in, the British soldiers let them on board the ships and let them throw the tea in the water. They didn't stop them. Nobody died. Nobody was beat up. It was just done. Now, on top of that, though, the treason that was later committed, the Revolutionary War, it would have been treason to oneself not to back that. Each of those men would have felt that if they would not have sided with their own people in the colonies to fight against the tyrannical government they were dealing with, it would have been a treason to themselves and their own ideals and the morality of the society as a whole, which is a bigger treason. It's, when you cannot take when you stand with a community, your entire community. Yes, there were some that don't. There's always some that don't want to go against the grain. But the fact is, there's those ones that finally sit back and decide it's time. I have to take a stand. But they don't do it on one thing. They've been building to this. They've been discussing all the ways that, this has happened. Everything that happens, this is what we have to stop. There's this thing they did. There's this thing they did. And we've gone to them and tried to change this. And we talked to them about that. And instead they said, oh, okay. And they took it back. But instead they threw something else at us. There was the Stamp Act. And then there was the Intolerable Acts. They repealed the Stamp Act, but then they turned around and threw the Intolerable Acts at us, where we had to quarter the soldiers and we had to pay taxes on several other things. Molasses being one of them. They found ways to just keeping our rights from us in this, of the Revolutionary War. And that's what it really was. The biggest thing that was really going on is these were British citizens who were not given the same rights as British citizens sitting on that little island across the ocean. Mm-hmm. And therefore, that's why they all stood up and said, we can't do this anymore. And it took, there was a group of men, they called it the Continental Congress, that actually sat down and made those decisions. Yes, you had the Sons of Liberty pulling little, terrorist attacks. I won't deny that that's what they were. But they weren't there to terrorize the community. They were there to terrorize the British soldiers. So it was a different thing that they were really after. And yeah, did they terrorize governors and so forth? Duly appointed, not elected, not even representing the people, they were representing the throne. Who was their enemy by then? So that's when it's okay. I will sit there and say that you have to have let it boil and then explode. You can't just take this one thing and go, well, we're not going to tolerate this anymore and move on. Because it's only one, and there was no attempt. There's been no attempt by all those people to come up with the real solution to, if you're believing that the election was a fraud, fine. Now, what do you want to do to fix it? You can't go backwards. The rules have, everything's been exhausted as to try and overthrow that, or overturn that rather, I should say. Okay, go forward. You don't have to be violent, because if you're going to be violent, you're going to throw it all out. And if that's what you want, fine, but you needed a lot more people to do that than you had. I don't know. Beyond that, I don't know any more to say, But I will say this, to compare this, as some did, to other previous violent acts that were going on in the nation throughout this year, this is different. This was not, going after stores. This was not this was not public looting. This was not just rioting. This was definite. This was an attack on our government, which in its own way is an attack on all of our way of life. That's a difference.
Agreed. All right, that's an excellent point. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. Wait a minute. There's some interference going on. You guys hear that? Because there's something's not quite right.
Something's not right.
I am disgusted with you for making me agree with you, you reptilian scum. This is Wake Up Sheeple 35, and I just want to say I agree with you. First off, QAnon is really making us conspiracy theorists look whack. We are not whack. We're cool. Also, I just want to say that I don't know why they're focusing on the wrong things. Don't they understand that we all used to agree that Freemasons were reptilians that were controlling the government? We can't fix it that way. And also, I just want to say that my favorite baseball team was also attacked, but all the way in the early 2000s, before when Vince Namoli still owned them and hated email because he, like myself, believed that email truly is a fad. And I really am disgusted by all of this. But my only hope is that if we can just kick QAnon out of here, us regular, old-fashioned conspiracy folks will finally have our day in the sun. Thank you.
All right, I think I was
Sheeple
able
out.
I think I was able to get the that transmission done. Okay, good. We're back. We're good. Okay. Well, sorry about that, folks, but it's a live
I want to
show.
go home now.
You can't stop everything.
Can't go home.
There was
Gotta get it.
treason and
something next
sedition on this show, so we need to actually nip that in the bud for next time. So, guess it's to me now. So let's see. Should Freemasons condone seditious activity? And I'll say yes with a but. Only when there is actually gross infringements on life, liberty, or property rights. I think that's really the only time that it would be acceptable. Where you need to rebel against the authority who is causing people to die deliberately, right? Who's actually cutting off certain liberties that were, human liberties that we were talking about, and really just infringing on what we have to our name to protect. So I think those cases in today's modern age will be extremely rare because of the foundation that we have in the government. But I think it's it's certainly one of those things that as a last tool to use. Not unlike the way we started the show with what happened in January of 2021 is not the same as the Revolutionary War, because we had a lot of different contexts. We had decades of thought and Continental Congress to prove that. So anyway, this has been a great episode to talk about, really address some of the hard issues of today's society, what we as Masons should do in today's society, and how we should meet, act, and part. And so with that, I want to thank you all very much for watching, and keep searching for more light. Have a good night.